Hi, Frida. Thank you so much. We are very honored that you could take the time out and join us today.
Of course.
Um, if we start from the very beginning, so not the beginning of the time, that'll be too far away in time, but what got you interested in climate space and communication space? So let's start discussing that a little bit.
I think for me, I guess a corporate life before climate. But I guess I was always quite interested in social impact and environmental impacts. But I do remember I worked at a company and we had a lecturer once that came in and talked about how little time humanity has been on the planet. And I remember he took a long string over 6 meters long across the room, which was the lifespan of the planet, and kind of showed on that string how little time, like the last centimeter that humans have been around, and like the last millimeters is where all the impact from human activity has happened. And for me, that was a real eye opener. And I kind of knew that I need to somehow spend my working life at trying to reverse some of that damage that humans have done in a very short space of time, if you look at it from a planetary perspective. So I think that's what got me into kind of studying these issues, uh, doing political science work, and then kind of ending up working quite a lot of years, almost a decade, for a big NGO called Oxfam, doing a lot of global campaigning on different topics, food security, biofuels, poverty, tax. But also then that was kind of my first entry, I guess, into climate. So for the Copenhagen summit in 2000, a long time ago now, 2009, I was part of the team organizing on the ground that big climate summit. And after that point, I think for me, there was kind of no return when I kind of saw, all the big leaders were there. We had all the science, we presented the science, the activists were there,
Mhm.
and still world leaders failed miserably to produce some sort of global outcome that could save humanity. So I think that was my pivotal moment where I kind of knew I don't think I can work on any other topic for the rest of my life. And I think for me, the toolbox that I have with me is the communicator's toolbox. That comes kind of naturally to me. So my working life is spent on communications, crafting campaigns, writing books, writing op-eds. So I guess the pen or the keyboard is my sword.
Awesome. Great, great, great. What bored you on the brand side? I'm just trying to understand that. Like very interesting journey, brands, you talked about Oxfam, you talked about NGOs, climate summit, and then communication toolbox. Why did you leave the brand world, like the hardcore brand world, working in that?
I guess I was at the heart of the brand world.
Mm-hmm.
I worked quite a few years for a big a soda company, shall we
Okay.
say? Yeah.
Okay.
Um, and I spent some time in Africa when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
During that time, and it was for me, it was kind of just a bit of a wake up call. So I remember working in this massive corporate. I could see the kind of the impact that that business had on the ground in Zimbabwe,
Mm-hmm.
where I spent some time, and what big part that brand played in people's lives, being part
Mm-hmm.
of their celebrations. And for me, that was a real kind of eye opener. It's like these big brands have massive, massive impact and not a good one, particularly soda
Okay.
brands, right? Health impacts, environmental
Mm-hmm.
impacts, plastic pollution. There's a whole host of things that come with that. So I I decided to, I mean, to leave that world to kind of pursue more, I guess, impactful initiatives. So that's what drew me, I guess, into the NGO world, because that's
Very
purpose felt strongest.
Very interesting because in my previous life, before I moved to Sweden around 10 years ago, before that, I've worked with large brands, Nestle's, Coca-Cola's a lot, like 10, 20, 30 brands or so. And one of those was, of course, I said Coca-Cola was a brand. I worked very closely with Coca-Cola in their, yeah, a lot of stuff. Like, as you're saying, like, because I've been involved in the Pakistan and MENA region a lot, and that's a very different, a young, youth-focused, growing markets, and then FMCGs and those markets are trying to get to consumers as early as possible, because then there's a whole lifetime they can enjoy
Yeah.
of a consumer.
Yeah.
So it was always that how can we like music platform, cricket platform, sports, all. So I can relate to that, and I felt a similar kind of a feeling because there is so much resources here. How could they actually be put like right now? What we are trying to do is to clean up a mess, like a mess left by misutilization or whatever we are doing. So I think it needs to go back and fix the system. So really, really love the cause or the thought that you have in terms of working there. Well, let's stick on brands for a few minutes. I think this is very interesting. Your deep exposure into brands. Let's try to explore that a little bit. Why do you think brands, as you said, impact, like impact can be positive or it can be negative. Why don't they take impact as a positive angle? And we're talking about very large brands. What do you think are the reasons which don't make them kind of fix that from the get-go, the root cause, for example? Till it becomes a problem which the planet needs to fix and find resources how to fix. Yeah.
I mean, the short answer is profit,
Okay.
right? I mean, big brands are primarily profit driven.
Hmm.
So, I mean, that's the short end of it. And of course, global brands like the Unilevers, the Coca-Colas of the world, they have massive impact. And I think, there are a lot of brands who are trying to do good things, but if the business model is flawed in the beginning, if it's based around, profit is the thing that you measure against, that is going to, of course, affect your whole operations, how you operate, the culture, what you're aiming towards, and the impact that you have. So in my mind, I am struggling a little bit to see how these big brands could turn around because they are based around very unsustainable practices and business models. So I think I guess what is interesting right now with the kind of the impact world and what we're seeing is that people who are genuinely and authentic about it, they are building different kind of structures. So I think it's interesting to look at what are those structures. When you have an opportunity to build from the beginning, not to turn a big ship like Coca-Cola around, that's very difficult to do. But if you have the opportunity to build something new, how do you build that from the get-go to take into account minimizing your impact on the world and increasing your positive impact on the world?
Very interesting. Very interesting analogy here. Like we have the big ship here, like the big ship cluster, which are legacy brands, very large, driven by maybe it was a time when profit was the only thing, and then they are structured, and then governance hierarchies, and as you get bigger, boards become powerful, and then you accumulate. So profit becomes a huge Mount Everest, which you can never you are the Mount Everest of profit, let's say. So this is the Mount Everest of profit, and these are small tiny hills and pebbles which we are now creating on the impact side, which say the model. So amazing point. Like the model is flawed. I'm trying
I
to
mean,
understand.
just to add to, I mean, the model is also flawed because people are too far away from people, right? I remember working in Oxfam. We worked with Unilever to do a mapping of their supply chains in one country. So really looking at like what are all the individual people, farmers and producers working to put value into the stream that becomes the Unilever brand. They had never done such a mapping, so they just didn't know where these things came from, right, as part of their value chains. But when you look at it all the way down to the individual farmers or farmer cooperatives, that's when you start to obviously see some of the impacts in real life. So I think a lot of the problems for big brands is this distance between the individual farmer that is, growing the crop that goes into your product and the corporate headquarters, right? So that was a very, I think, eye-opening, both for us as an organization at that time, but also I remember for Unilever as a company to fully understand the impact that they're having. And if they make a change as a business, as a corporate, what positive effect could that have then on individual farmers, individual farmer cooperatives? So of course, there are things that brands can do. You can't do anything though, unless you know.
So very interesting point that there is a knowledge or the footprint gap. So they don't know what the footprint is, that's where mapping can help them structure. Okay, oh shit, this is not so great. And this could be an alternative. So that's the knowledge or how the model can change. What about the consumer? Because eventually big brands are getting into my shelves or my throat or my hands as a consumer. What's the problem there? Because there is a climate narrative that exists and it has been working, when in some cases complete denial from certain groups. Why can't the consumers feel the pinch?
I mean, the consumer perspective is tricky, right? Because it's
Mm,
based around you having, you're very enlightened, you're
mm,
informed, you know about different brands and their impacts. There's easy, accessible information to you, whether, Coca-Cola is better than Pepsi or
mm,
Lindex is better than Zara. If you have all that information, then you should also, as a consumer, be able to choose the right thing, right?
mm.
But this is tricky because as consumers, we are guided by a lot of things. We're
Yeah.
guided by habits. We're guided by, social pressure, norms, all sorts of different things, economy. So even if there's a well communicated, sustainable option to the
Mm.
brands that you know of already, it's not for certain that you'll choose that anyway, right? You're in the shop,
Okay.
you're running around, you're usually buying these apples, you're usually buying these things, you're almost on
Mm.
autopilot. So we know that like it's quite, the other things that need to happen to change kind of consumer behaviors. And one of them is choice editing. And that's something I don't think that has been explored enough when it comes to kind of consumer impacts.
Mhm.
Consumers are obviously, they're free to make their own choices, but they're also a case for like, why should there be unsustainable products in our shops altogether?
Mhm. Mhm.
You should do the reverse. They should be sustainable by default and mark the ones that are not sustainable. And if you are a Coop or an ICA, you could work with choice editing. So you
Mhm.
choose to remove certain things, right? And that's happened with, bananas. It's
Yeah.
almost difficult to find bananas that are not fair trade and or organic these days,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So I think the consumer angle is tricky.
Okay. Now, very interesting point because consumer angle is not only determined by information. Like first, you need to know, as you said, like can you know that brand A versus brand B versus brand C? Is there a difference? So that knowledge gap exists. But then you talked about the context of constraints. Like a constraint can be it can be the habit or the economy of the consumer. Context could be the emotional pattern. So there intervening variables involved on the consumer side. But you brought something very interesting here, which was choice editing, because that brings a third player in the entire equation. So there is brands, which are the creators, products, services. There's consumer, which is the receiver, consumers. But then there is a presenter in the center. As you said, like this could be a retail store, or this could be an environment where shopping is actually happening, uh, which could present choices in a way which are more sustainable, as you're saying.
Yeah, to be honest, I think my working life, I've steered away from consumer angles,
Mm, mhm.
gone straight for trying to impact the brands in
Okay.
their operations and working on trying to make happen the policy frameworks, the legislation, the regulation issues that then affecting these brands and what they put on the market. So I
Okay.
think for me, that's kind of been the focus of my work in life. It's like working with advocacy and working with communication to kind of affect people and brands with power to make different choices.
And how does that journey typically looks like when you're working with brands in that kind of space? As you said, there are several circles like policy, how the brands need to look outward. So let's talk about that a little bit.
I mean, so I mean, some of the work that we did in the Oxfam days, which was both working with brands, like I mentioned, with
Hmm.
Unilever to kind of map and sort of really dig into the details of
Hmm.
practices that needed to change.
Hmm.
But then also trying to do more public communications around brands as well. So we did this campaign called Behind the Brands that kind of highlighted. I remember we had a map of how all these brands are connected, like the brands
Okay.
you love, right? So you have like your Mars bars and your Dove soaps and
Hmm.
all those consumer products and how they are connected into very few, obviously big companies that in turn manage those brands. And that was a kind of a mix of working with an inside strategy where you work
Hmm.
to, talking to the companies, proposing
Okay.
changes, mapping and looking at what needs to change internally with an external pressure. So trying to communicate about what impact these brands have. And that is going to obviously what big brands care about, which is like their public image, their
Hmm.
consumers, what do they think about our brand? Um, so obviously they're very sensitive also to kind of negative pressures as well.
Okay.
So working in a big NGO, so, it was a lot about kind of having an inside track and also an outside track to kind of try and push on several levers at the same time, while also
Hmm.
the third arm would then also be working on kind of one step, before that, which is like,
Okay.
is there international regulation that needs to happen? Can we campaign and do advocacy around that legislation that will then in turn force these brands to do the right things? So I think that kind of multiple levels. But I think what I'm hearing now in the context of 2025 is that a lot of brands are realizing that you do need these structures
Okay.
because it's not a level playing field. If
Hmm.
you're putting sustainable products on the market, take um, you know, uh, like the clothes for hire businesses. There was a lot of them a while back, like different
Hmm.
wardrobes. You could hire, party dresses. You don't need to buy them. You can hire them. It's very difficult to make those things work because it's not a level playing field, right?
Um,
So I think that is the tricky bit when you're trying to so that means that you do need to change the structures. So a lot of brands these days are also they realize they can't just put a sustainable product on the market and hope that someone is going to choose it, but rather like, okay, are there kind of obstacles to making sure that this product even exists?
mm,
Particularly like circular solutions or recyclable solutions, secondhand solutions. Those types of of things do need to
mm.
kind of find a market, and you can't do that sometimes without changing the rules and the rule book. So a lot of
But
them are
if
now, I think,
that,
is trying to work on policy as well. So I think that's interesting because I think what I mean with my albeit limited time in the impact startup
mm,
world, um, that is obviously like you're a founder, you're full steam ahead, you're building your product, and that kind of gets forgotten a little bit. It's the nice to have to also like, okay, but if this product is going to succeed on the market, is it something that I
mm.
do need to do in terms of influence as well? Is there legislation that needs to happen or sort of market adjustments that need to happen for this product or service to have a place? So
Is
shout out to
communication,
Impact World.
yeah, is communication a point there as well? Because you're saying, of course, market adjustment, policy, frameworks. Is communication also a challenge?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is, it's a bit of a minefield, right?
Hmm.
For brands. If you are shouting too much, then you're greenwashing. If you're
Okay.
not talking at all about your sustainability work, then you're green hushing. Right?
Okay.
So there's a happy medium, I think, in there. But I think it's all about being authentic.
Hmm.
What is authentic and honest? So I think the best examples of people doing this are the ones that are uh, trying to lay it out as it is, flaws and all, and being honest
Hmm.
about in this area, we're doing quite well compared to this. In this area, we haven't succeeded as much, but we're doing these things to try and get further. So I think it's really about kind of that honesty, if you're going to communicate about these issues. Because if you don't, someone is going to call you out.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
not great.
Very interesting point, like being authentic. Like, for example, you might have a legacy model here, which you need to acknowledge. But at the same time, you might be running a small thing here, which you're trying to change gradually. But I think what's important in these two situations is the relative sizes. If this is too insignificant, it would again not sound authentic. Like this big negative and this small positive doesn't correlate. And probably also the progress over time, because we are seeing things in a story format. Story telling means like over the years, uh, how are we seeing that this brand is actually delivering there? And you talked about greenwashing and greenwashing on the other side. Who decides the fine line? Is it the consumer? So typically, it's how the consumer, or does the media decide that?
It depends, right? If it
Yeah.
becomes a media story, you know, um, I mean, I think, I mean, I've worked on the PR side, working with brands
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
advising them on communications,
Yeah.
and just kind of bringing it back to decisions that you make within your business. You should
Mm.
do the headline stress test.
Okay.
You're making a decision in your board or in your operation about your product. You need to envisage, okay, what would be the headline if someone's writing about this? Someone's got access to my email, like something happens, someone finds out about this decision or this product or whatever the decision is, like what would be the headline?
Mm. Mm.
Because that could happen, right? So
Yeah.
if you're putting something out, you're not honest about your climate impact of your product, someone calls you out, what could be the headline that happens. So I think when we're advising brands and how you build, honest communication,
Mhm.
is like, number one, you need to be honest and sort of see, okay, this is the good stuff, this is the not so good stuff. For the not so good stuff, we need to have a strategy for make it better and communicate that
Mm.
honestly and openly. Um, because you don't want to be in a position where you're kind of managing the fallout, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But that in turn takes active communications.
Okay.
And that's not something that maybe all startup brands have time or,
Mm.
knowledge or money to prioritize. But that's such an important part of building a brand, like doing really good, honest communications. And I think on your point on like, oh, our solution is so small, you know, um, but it is important to connect it all the way up, right?
Okay.
So this thing that we are doing, you should always ask the question, why is that important, right? It's important because it can have this impact or change this particular thing. Okay, well, why
Mhm.
is that particular thing important? Because it leads to this, and that way you kind of work your way down into some sort of what could become a structure of a core message eventually. But you need to be able to connect all those dots all the way up to we're contributing to tackling climate change. So how do you
Mm.
bring that journey down to your particular service or your particular product? What does that journey look like? If we do this, if we succeed in this, what could that lead
Mm.
to? Um,
Very interesting. Like, and for our audience here and later on, headline stress test, very interesting point for everyone too. And then the chain of whys, hows, and whats that you're talking about, like questioning and following a logical framework around every action or initiative you are putting out there. Really great. Amazing discussion on the brand side. Let's move to the climate side a bit.
Good, because I haven't been in
Yeah.
the brand world for so long.
But on the climate side, what do you think is the main issue? We still have this massive problem and it's sticky. We are running out of time. As you said in the start, I remember also Carl Sagan, he at one point in time, he was the author of Cosmos and everything. And somewhere he talked about a cosmic calendar. That if you take a cosmic calendar, there'll be the entire 365 days will be everything else happening, and the last few seconds will be humanity. And here comes humanity on the planet, and the planet goes boom. What do we do with this? Why? What is the sticky issue in the climate space? Why can't we, as billions of people together and trillions of resources together, solve what we are collectively creating?
That's a big question. Why can't we solve it? I think at the heart of it is that we built two big systems. The systems are too big for this finite planet. So we built systems and structures and economies that are not compatible with how an organism works. Right? We're above our carrying capacity. So I think that is one of the problems. So the systems are too big and it's too difficult for us to rein them in. I mean, just look at the global kind of value chain. How do you even start to kind of rein that in? The other problem, I think, is power. So where does the power lie for these changes? And that group is shrinking. We're now living in the time of, tech lords that are bigger than states, bigger than the UN. They have more power, combined. They can start wars. They affect our minds. So power in the hands of a very small elite with very big powers, right? With the money, with the technology to affect the whole world and keep extracting what we need from this planet to make a profit. And then I think that the third thing would be that the old rules no longer apply. We used to have a rules-based order. We used to have a UN whose purpose it was to kind of, bring nation states together so that we wouldn't be at war. To solve those issues, multilateralism, cooperation, science-based decision-making, all of that under, a very short space of time, those rules don't apply anymore. A good example, I just looked at yesterday. If you haven't seen it, the White House account. I mean, it's a shit show, right? But the White House public account, the stuff that they put out is mind-blowing that is even possible, right? For the first, 4th of July, what Trump put out, just go to the White House account and just have a look yourselves. It's crazy, right? But it's this tricky situation where the systems are too big for the planet. We're depleting it, the organism that we live on and that we are dependent on. Too few people with too much power guiding everyone, and the collapse of rules, democracy, and institutions. That's a really lethal combination, right? So that is the predicament. I mean, climate change is one symptom of that. Another one is that we're just eradicating species and the natural world at like an ever-increasing pace. That's the predicament that we're in, right?
Very good, very good, very well pointed out. And I think it's a framework for not only, as you're saying, of the climate side, but a lot of problems that are headed our way. Because we talked about like human species lifespan as just a blink in the cosmic 1 year calendar. But a single generation's lifespan is not even a blink. Like we come here, live for 50 to 80 years, one generation, hands over the baton to the next generation. They open their eyes to with a lot of hope. So, okay, we are getting this new world, and with the aspiration, I'll do my college degree, I'll go out, I'll have a loan to pay, but I'll get a job, I'll get a car, I'll follow my dreams. So we build these dreams for a generation, but on the other side, we are handing them shit.
Yep.
What's
in Swedish is called the bajsmacka.
Okay.
Sandwich. Yeah.
Okay. So how do we solve that because I think generational switch is very, very important because it's the responsibility of the outgoing generation. Just like if you are a CEO of an organization, if you want to leave the organization, you of course want to leave it on good terms to the next CEO so that the organization can survive. That's basic corporate thing. So I don't know. I'm as confused over here as some of the audience here might be. Like, why do we don't feel the pinch that this is going to be a next generation's planet and we need to hand it over in proper format or form?
I mean, we're living in this like ultra rapid system, right?
Hmm.
Very short term. If you're an impact, it's like it's about pivots, it's about changing your, it's so fast. You have the, you quarterly based economies running. You have
Yes.
like short-term political systems. It's like an incredibly fast churn that is faster and faster. And you have your scrolling on top of that, just like it's so fast. And we're like bombarded with like a thousand
Hmm.
things at the same time. On the other hand, there are a lot of indigenous communities who they think 7 generations,
Hmm.
right? So how can we be stewards of the world and the planet as that we are on today? And how can we make sure that that planet, those resources
Hmm.
exist for 7 generations? So the decision-making process is deliberate and it's slower. So I think the speed of the system that we're living in is
Hmm.
not very conducive to making long-term wise decisions about what is the world that we want to hand over.
Hmm.
The flip side of that is that we know that is a very underutilized um, narrative when it comes to engaging people, because that
Hmm.
is very authentic for us. It's a very deep insight that comes from, we know that when you are calling on people's,
Hmm. Hmm.
ability to lead, being a steward, handing over things to the next generation.
Hmm.
What legacy do you want to hand over to your children and their children? That is a very powerful lever of change. And I think
Hmm.
that's what we've found. I mean, I worked a lot of my years in the climate parents space,
Hmm.
doing what's called intergenerational campaigning, which is a
Okay.
very fancy word for trying to exactly connect those dots. And what we've found is that a lot of the times that generational aspect
Hmm.
only comes into play either when you're a young adult, you lose a parent or
Hmm.
lose someone near to you, or you have a child yourself. When you're like smacked in the face with this generational kind of
Hmm.
urge to protect someone else, this child's life, this child's future. And I think that's it. Maybe it comes back to something that Jacques Cousteau said. He had this quote saying, uh, "We protect what we love,
Hmm.
but we love what we understand, but we can only understand what we've been taught." So a lot of I think how the climate parent movement has worked is trying to, how can we activate people's deepest values that they have, and some of that work is exactly that. Like, how can we, starting from a point of love and care for our
Hmm.
children and all children and the next generation and generations coming after us, what do we need to do now? How can we step into our power to make sure that we produce better outcomes for someone else, not for ourselves? So I think that
Hmm.
is one of the narratives that we found is really powerful, because it also connects people across the world. It doesn't matter what country you're in. So the platform that we built and the coalition that we built was basically
Hmm.
mums from across 50 countries,
Uh-huh.
all coming together, seeing impacts of climate change in all our different countries and in contexts, and realizing, how can we activate that love and that care and that protection feelings that we have inside to help guide our campaigning work. So that is like putting parents at the forefront of our communications. What's the parental voice? Sometimes when you look at the TV, you hear about climate change, you hear from the activists, you hear from the scientists, you hear from the business leaders, you hear from the politicians. But I think what we've been trying to build is a narrative around, for us, basically parents, and what
Hmm.
to do as parents to make sure that our children is handed a better world, because that's what we care about. And that is exactly the same from my friend Bavreen in India. She's trying to make sure that her kids don't breathe toxic air, which 93% of the world's children do every single day.
Hmm.
It's the same for my friend Camilla in Poland, who's struggling with coal power plants. It's the same with my friend Maya in the UK. So this is a very common, authentic identity and value that we in our communications try to activate, because we know it's there in people, right?
Amazing. We talked about intergenerational campaigning, like using legacy as a lever for change. And how do we scale this from the 50 that you're talking about? How do we scale it to a level which is planet-wide? What's the barrier there?
There are a lot of barriers. I mean, for this particular audience that we're talking about, it's mainly female-led. It's mums who
Okay.
is, feeling somehow an extra need to do this kind of work to protect the next generation. It's mums that are very busy in their everyday lives, so they're very time poor. They're sometimes also kind of financially poor. But what they do have is, the sense of urgency, the love for their children. They have usually the networks and the connections to kind of build from the ground up, like local groups trying to affect change locally.
Okay.
So it's not about building, I guess, big global things. And what we try to achieve with Our Kids Climate, like by finding that platform, is a home for all those small nodes everywhere. So
Okay.
it's kind of building in the similar way that nature builds. Nature doesn't build just pine trees, right? It builds a forest, an ecosystem of different things that is a puzzle that work together. So this whole intergenerational work is like, how can we plow resources and find a home for all these groups to connect, and what do they need to succeed? And a lot of times that is financing to be able to kind of be free to do that kind of work. It's
Yeah.
about connecting with others and learning from others, doing things together at certain times. You come together as kind of like a global collective, which we do at certain points in time. And it's like kind of building that global kind of support system.
Okay.
So I mean, to scale, I would love a big pot of money.
Got it. Got
And
it.
that's what we did with Our Kids Climate. It's like, how can we work, particularly those of us who are based in privileged, rich Western countries? How can we tap into our networks, try to find the funding that we can then, divide out in micro grants, like small pots of money. Normally, these kind of small initiatives and small groups, they don't need that much, right? It's £1,000 to produce T-shirts or to organize an event to connect in the communities, or produce a book or a pamphlet. So it's not much that's needed, but it does take some kind of global coordination, and it does take a pot of money to do that work, to support all these networks, to try to make them connect better and have the time and the space to do that work.
I think that's amazing. We are trying to do that in BRIM as well. Like, we have a place in the platform where you can actually create initiatives. You can actually go and support initiatives, fund initiatives. Because I think one of the main issues with the nonprofit sector, as we were talking in the start of the call, and I've helped like 300 nonprofits in Sweden start up, some of them to scale up and all. It's that they're very closely linked to local funding ecosystems, which are right now in the current political wave that we have been talking about. They are kind of drying up right now very rapidly. Number one. Number two, public funding initiatives, of course, since they're public funded, when that funding comes to a nonprofit, it is like if a dollar moves in, the 60 cents will be spent on just monitoring that nonprofit reporting, getting the funding. So the bureaucracy will kill the business model, because there'll be so little left for impact, and that impact then is project term focused, and it cannot scale beyond that. So I think there needs to be a completely different way of making initiatives work, as you're saying, that people supporting peer, like how can peer support pull up things, people in a different region kind of maybe have different access to funds. So I think very interesting discussion. We have a few minutes, like 7, 8 minutes left in our talk, and you have so much experience. I'm just like, it's the ninth page now on notes taking. But let's go to Klimatkollen. what are you trying to accomplish there, and talk about this amazing startup or the nonprofit that you're involved with. So let's tell us, take a minute and tell us what you're building there.
So Klimatkollen is a citizen platform. So trying to find data around climate change that is relevant to citizens. And that's about showing data around your local municipality. So really trying to make it local. How can you find out more about the local municipality where you're living, how much, is being emitted, but also what that municipality is doing to tackle climate change.
Okay.
So it's a citizen-led platform. We show data about municipalities, but we also show data around brands and companies. So a year and a half ago, we got a grant from google.org, and we're building an AI agent, an AI system that we call Garbo AI,
Okay.
who we're training to read and extract data from company sustainability reports. And then we extract that data, we publish it on Klimatkollen. We also publish it on companies' own Wikipedia pages to create transparency around how much are companies actually emitting. Because, what matters for the atmosphere is particles emitted, right? That is how you measure. That's the KPI. How much are we actually emitting? How much are we putting into the atmosphere? Because it will stay there. It's not going to disappear. It will, for the length of, in human terms, it will be forever. So our laser focused has really been like, how much are companies emitting, and can we put that into perspective? Can we give consumers and citizens some guidance? So when you're on the bus, you're wondering if H&M is better than Zara. Can you find those answers at Klimatkollen? So we're trying to take this data, make it transparent, open source, so that others can also use this data and scrutinize it and use it. And putting it out there, making visualizations and graphics, communicating with this data on social media, and using AI in this whole process to help us, because we're very small. We're only 5 or 6 people who are doing this work. So how can we use technologies and AI to help us scale this work? So at the moment, we're working with 300 of Sweden's largest companies and showing data about them. But of course, when this pipeline is good enough, then we'll plug in more companies into that pipeline. So the goal is to build a global transparency platform where it's easy for citizens anywhere to find out about the brands that they love, how much they are emitting, how much they should be cutting emissions to be in line with the Paris Agreement, if they're doing enough, are there plans to tackle climate change or sustainability plans, are they enough for what's needed, and how are they tracking according, if you compare them to their peers or their sector. So those are the things that kind of working with data to put data, facts, and arguments in the hands of people. And that could be investors looking at companies, trying to figure out how to make the best investments. It's also in the hands of employees that are a core bit of change in companies from the inside out. How can we arm them with better facts on how they're tracking on climate change? And of course, arming citizens and consumers looking at these brands as well. So that's the whole purpose of Klimatkollen. So increasing transparency around emissions, both on the corporate side and on your local municipal side.
Okay, amazing. I think that's a great idea, because I think typically reports are destined to become archives which nobody sees. Like it's something which you don't want to read is in the report. It's always like that. So this is a whole pile of information. So you're trying to bring an archive kind of like an archive process to an active decision process. So I
Yeah,
think that's
because
a
not all of
huge,
it's relevant, right? So if you
yeah,
read a sustainability report today, it's 23, it's 40 pages long.
exactly,
It's a lot of words. It's very difficult to know
exactly.
how well are they actually doing, because the numbers are quite hidden. You can't compare them to anything. 5% decrease. Is that good? Is that bad? Compared to what? Is it a lot? Is it a little? I don't know. And that data today is unstructured, right? It's in individual sustainability reports. Our job is like, can we use AI to just hone in on what's really important, which are the emission numbers to start with? I mean, we pull out other data points as well, but like, what are the key KPIs that are relevant to the climate? Emissions is one of those. How much are they actually emitting in tons? We need those numbers. So that's what AI is trying to do, is like extract the juicy stuff, and then we use that to kind of publicize it so you can then compare them That's the whole goal. So you can scrutinize and look at them. And I think one thing that was interesting in this work is when we've now looked at Sweden's 300, large cap, mid cap, biggest state-owned companies. So you always talk about Sweden is so tiny, it doesn't matter what we do, we don't emit that much. In Sweden, we emit territorially, so within our borders, about 44 million tons of greenhouse gases every year of carbon. 44 million tons. Swedes are behind the wheels of these 300 companies, more or less, of 1.3 billion tons of CO2. So Swedes working particularly in companies, through their value chains and through the connections and through the global economy, have huge power over how much is actually emitted. That is in turn impacting the atmosphere. So I think that's what we need to think about this. It's not just, oh, Sweden is a tiny country, we don't emit that much.
Yeah, because population dynamics are not relevant. It's as we were discussing in this space, influence on the power structure. And that power structure is that even if we are a small population, how big is the reach of this population? What kind of decisions it holds in different companies, which you are saying is collectively 1.3 billion tons and not the 44 million tons.
No.
Okay, very interesting. Very interesting, Frida.
That's a scale. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling when you think about it. But it also, I mean, you can't, I mean, emissions, it doesn't matter where those particles are emitted, right? So Sweden is a country, yes, we can look at the operations and the activities within our territory, but we know, of course, we're part of a global economy where like over-consuming to a huge degree, which means that we're importing a lot of things that are being produced in another country. The emissions of the stuff that we import from Temu, from Shane, they end up on someone else's bill. They end up on China's bill. So China's emissions are really big because of the consumption that we do in Sweden, in part.
Amazing. Great, amazing insight, Frida. In wrapping up our discussion, maybe a minute. What's your plan going forward? What's on the canvas for you? What's your aspiration, big thing in the next 5, 10 years?
5, 10 years, God, it's a long time. So this is what I'm struggling with, like the long-term perspective versus like what you do here and now. I think that's every founder's problem. It's like you need to do things right now, but you also need the long-term vision, and can't forget about that. But you also need to do this stuff right now. I think in the medium term, it's how do we get more funding into Klimatkollen so we can build and scale this pipeline beyond what we're doing right now, and that's both kind of to be able to plug in a lot more companies to make it a truly global transparency tool that we just think this should just be available. These are numbers that shouldn't be hidden away somewhere or someone paying for them. They should just be available. That's the baseline that we should know how much companies are emitting. So I think building that work. And then I would love for someone to come in and just see the potential in like what we've built, the technology and the AI system can be, because it's open source, it can be copied, it can be replicated. So if you are working on water or human rights or social equality or any other of the sustainability goals, you can copy this whole pipeline, write new prompts, and use the same material, the sustainability reports, to pull out then good, accurate data around water, for instance, or energy consumption. And you can have all these agents then kind of being really good at finding exactly that data point and then talking to each other. So anyone that's working within sustainability, I think that would be my dream. So both kind of building something open that other than can build on top of and create more positive change.
Amazing. Frida, I find a lot of synergies in what you're doing in Klimatkollen and in BRIM, for example. In BRIM, what we are trying to build is a community. Because I think with community, what we want to bring is the community. We want to give change makers the power to actually make impact. And there's a lot of money on the brand side. If we can move small portions out of that money and try to use it on the change maker side and try to power up causes, initiatives, organizations, nonprofits, amazing nonprofits like that you are building, how can that go forward? So I think I see a lot of room for collaboration there, so we should definitely take a call in the people who are listening to this to this chat now and later on. Feel free to reach out to me and to Frida for how you can collaborate with Klimatkollen, Startup Grind, BRIM. So we'll be sending out all that material. But Frida, thank you so much for taking us through a very real and honest journey through some of the large problems, hugely large. Like I cannot define a word beyond like, can we have a larger word than large?
Polycrisis.
Poly crisis that we have, and your amazing work that you have weaved through your years on this planet. So I think really appreciate your the way you have kind of depicted this for our community here.
Thank you
Thank
so much for inviting me. And
thank you
thank you
so
for
much.
listening, everyone.